Hey, I'm Father Nathan. I'm doing my first podcast of what we're calling Joyful Friar. Joyful Friar today is the Feast of Saint Dominic, and Dominic was the original Joyful Friar. When I was a young guy looking at the possibility of moving into Catholic priesthood, I looked at all these different possibilities. Many of them involved suffering and pain in the names of them and so on. I kept looking for the right fit. And when I learned that St. Dominic, the founder of the order of preachers, the Dominicans, was called the Joyful Friar, I thought, sign me up. I believe that that life is to be lived with all the joy that we can bring to it. So Joyful Friar today is the feast of St. Dominic, August the 8th. We're making this recording. And I didn't really appropriate the name to myself, that I am the embodiment of the Joyful Friar, but it's an aspiration of mine. I want to be joyful. And friar just means, it's from frere in French, or frater in Latin, a fraternity, a brotherhood. So I believe that I'm a joyful brother, and I happen to have that. I believe that's a universal call to be in part of the brotherhood of man, or something like that, or the humanity. But I also have on my very first podcast one of my own siblings, my dear baby sister, Cathryn Castle Garcia, who's going to introduce herself to you.
Hi there, I'm Cathryn, and as Nathan mentioned, I am his baby sister. I've been his baby sister all my life, and the way I describe it, I hit the sibling lotto when I had Nathan as my brother. So I'm very happy about that, and I'm glad to be here today. I am coming to you live from a super yacht somewhere off the northeast coast of the United States. My husband, Captain Gui Garcia, and I work on board, and we tend to move about. The same way that Nathan is called an itinerant preacher, or a traveling preacher in the Dominican order, Guy and I are traveling mariners. We are seafarers.
Sweet. And you have been pent up because of the pandemic for a couple of years, and landlocked and so on. So it's only been in the last few months that you've been able to get back out to sea, where it's sort of I think of you as a mermaid, and that your natural habitat is around the water. So I'm happy that you and he can be in the place that gives you joy.
We are indeed, and it's been a great summer, and we still have the remainder of the summertime this season towards the northeastern United States, and then we'll be traveling back down to Florida, Bahama waters. So yeah, it feels really good to be back.
Good. Well, I'm hoping that one day you'll make your way back to the desert in Tucson, where I live. But for right now, we're both doing what we need to do. I've been guest on so many podcasts. I started being a podcast guest before I'd ever listened to a podcast. I really didn't know what they were. But I've gotten advice from people that you really ought to have your own podcast, which at first to me sounded like you really ought to colonize the moon. I just thought, how in the world, how would I do that? But as I've watched other podcasters just bring whatever it is, their passion, to this format, I began to think that couldn't be all that hard. So we're going to try to get started anyway. When I am a guest on other people's podcasts, it's usually because of the work that you have helped me make known to the world, that is described in my two Afterlife Interrupted books, books 1 and 2. That work will be a large part of future segments of this podcast. In that work, you and I have collaborated on it, about helping souls that die sudden, violent deaths, who come to me in a dream, show me a little bit of a dreamscape, enough to describe what happened to them. Although it's buffered, it's not horrific, but people show me oftentimes a violent death. And then you've been a prayer partner in that process, where we then go into protected prayer. We did our prayer with the saints and angels just before going, hitting record today. And You're very familiar with the work that we do, helping souls speak through briefly just to tell us what's going on. And they're near the end of some sort of healing modality, some sort of initial level that souls that die sudden violent deaths might need, kind of therapeutic, a chance to catch their breath. And then we help them kind of out the door. I think of us as like the discharge staff in some hospital or medical facility where they're making sure you understand your meds, your next therapy appointment, and who's picking you up. And then we help them move along. Well, for those of you in the audience, Cathryn is one of the things she does is she's worked in the publishing industry. You want to say a little bit about that?
Yes, in addition to working in yachting, I've had a long career in the scuba diving and publishing industries, primarily publishing scuba diving magazines, both magazines that are for people who are enthusiasts about scuba diving and those that are in the profession. And I still do some of that to this day. And I also publish independent books for clients in a lot of genres, which that's where you fit in, into my independent publishing group.
Exactly. And Cathryn has the skill of taking a first-time author, which I was what was that? I started writing in, I think, 2006, the Antoto 2 book that made it into the publishing world in 2011. So you helped me go all the way from manuscript to being able to push the button on Amazon and launch a book. And we've since done 2 other books together, and I have 2 more in the hopper. But anyway, I happened to hit that same sibling lottery that you mentioned so sweetly, because when it was time for me to get published, it was right when the publishing world was beginning the massive move from mostly New York-based publishing houses that tell you no, we don't want your book, to independent publishing or hybrid publishing, where you actually get your book out to the world without somebody telling you can't. So you've facilitated that for me, and I'll always be grateful for that.
Well, that was a great first start, and I'm happy to know that you've got other works in progress. So just keep them coming.
They're in the pipeline. But for now, on this little interview today, I wanted, because of the theme of Joyful Friar, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about joy and how you understand that. But first about family, because Friar is frater, brother, we're siblings. And you and I had an upbringing that I think teed us up in the Dominican world in particular, and in the spirit world and the Catholic world, universally understood. You have a story to share about growing up in our little nuclear family.
Well, I'm the last of 5, and the way that happened, I'm apart by 6 years from my nearest brother, and then 8 years from you. So the way I've heard you say to people that I was the only child of 5, that I kind of had our parents to myself.
Yes.
And obviously they had me later in life, when I think particularly for our dad, he by then knew how to pick up a baby and hold it, and had a little more experience and a lot more time to spend with me. So I was really lucky in that regard.
Yeah, I watched that because our older sister Mimi is 15 years older than you. She was beginning to have her family of 6 kids when you were still small.
Yeah, she had her first child when I was 10.
Yes.
So I became an aunt at 10.
Yeah.
So there's a considerable spread there.
I remember watching Dad hold Matthew, his first grandchild, at a distance like it would break. And I remember thinking, that's why I've always felt this way. I always wanted a warmer relationship with him than we were really able to create. We were both doing the best we could, I suppose, but it was just the way it was. He was holding that child out like it would break. But as you said, somehow he called you Bug because you kind of climbed on him.
Yep, I climbed up his pants leg like a bug, and I caused him to hold me whether he wanted to or not. And I think he finally just got accustomed to the way things were going to be with us. And it was really that way throughout his whole life. I sort of set the pace, and he went with that. So
I would imagine there are people listening to this that are from larger families who can understand that there's, that there can be a kind of a generational dynamic going on in the same group. Of 15 years is big. That's half a generation. And I can remember the makeup wars about Mimi being allowed to wear mascara and stuff like that. You were just in diapers, and they were dealing with, you know, a 15-year-old at the same time. Because it's the Feast of St. Dominic, I wanted to make people aware that we came from this Dominican family that we were just born into. My dad had only 2 siblings, and they both became Dominican sisters, first grade teachers. You and I are from a very small group of people who have an aunt named Maximus.
Yes, I think that's a pretty small group.
And her younger sibling, 3 years younger than her, was Leona. They each, when they entered Dominican religious life, took a religious name, and they each took the name of one of their parents. Our grandfather, Max, and our grandmother, Anna Lee. You have a story or two to share about growing up with nuns in the family?
Well, one of my earliest memories, they somehow fashioned for me a little nun habit that I used to run around the yard in when they would visit. That was, you know, it didn't stay white, and I didn't stay clean. But
why have I never heard of that until today? I didn't know that they made you a habit.
I don't know, they made me a tiny little habit. It wasn't one of the old fashioned ones. It was, you know, right at the knee, and but there was a little headpiece to it. And I'd go flying around the backyard and do the twirly bird around and around in circles. Yeah, it wasn't pristine by any stretch, but it was a lot of fun.
I got in the mail the record of the singing nun.
Yes.
Do you remember that exact copy that Mom owned? And that I remember sitting in the living room with Sister Maximus and Mom's best friend Doris, listening to Dominican. I have it now. Right. Next time that you're in Tucson, I'll pull that out, do a little bit of it.
Oh, I'm glad to know that.
Yeah, that little artifact.
Well, I think one of the great memories about growing up with both aunts, Maximus and Leona, is they each modeled not only their devotion, but their loving kindness in different ways. I think that those were really good balances for me, that there wasn't just one way to love and one way to live a devoted life. Sister Maximus, I've told you this story before, I thought that she had angels in her pockets when I was a little tiny girl, because every time I needed something, she had these big, deep pockets of her dress. Anytime I needed something, she was able to reach into her pocket and provide it. If it was a Band-Aid or a Kleenex or a piece of gum. Over time, I started asking for things that I thought she might not be able to produce. Like, let's see if the angels can send me a paperclip or a rubber band or a piece of string. And it seemed like anytime I asked for something of Sister Maximus, she really was able to reach into her pocket, and an angel would hand her just the thing that I had asked for. So, and I think I believed that for quite a long while, that she had that magical property.
She was such a force in our life. For our audience, our grandparents lived next door. Our dad's parents lived next door, so they were, you know, a large part of our life. And they had 3 kids. Dad was the youngest of the 3, and Maximus and Leona and Dad were each 3 years apart. But there was an odd family dynamic. They were very much children growing up in poverty. Our grandfather probably had PTSD from World War I. He was in the trench warfare in France and had mustard gas and all those atrocities and he was just very quiet. Mama used to say that he came back different. And in their upbringing, he was unemployed for 8 years during the Depression, and it was a very harsh life. Whenever I asked any of them about their childhood, the harshness of it was the first thing that they mentioned. Even with that, wasn't without love, but it was just poverty makes everything harder. And right. It looked like to me that Maximus became a kind of second mother to our dad, and they had a lifelong bond that really started because Maximus, being 6 years older, just saw that Dad needed more than their parents were able to provide, and so she just kind of stepped in and did that. That's probably familiar. There's plenty of families listening to this that have some story like that. And I started moving toward thinking about religious life. I looked at the 2 aunts. I didn't even look at the Dominican order because I'd not known Dominican men. I'd only known our aunt. I saw how they went about this idea of being celibate, living in a religious community, dedicating yourself to that apostolic mission. And I saw them go about it in ways that were loving, but in different directions. And I hadn't, the priests that I had known as a child were probably fine men, but they looked to me like very lonely, sometimes odd, awkward. There was not a priest in my childhood that I thought, I want to be like him. And so when I started thinking about it, it was a bit of an obstacle. But then when I did look at our aunts, they both had loving lives, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah. And each of them, like I said, they each demonstrated it in a different way. Maximus was more outdoorsy, more outgoing, roll up her sleeve and help in the garden sort of thing, where I think Leona was more reserved, and she loved from a greater distance. She wasn't as hands-on.
Maximus made it a point in her life. I think that the deepest love in her life was for our dad.
Yes,
that's the way I saw it. That was the strongest bond in her life. And so even though she was in religious life, she never learned to drive. So she just couldn't just pick up and go anywhere she wanted. She relied on other people to give her rides, which was not uncommon for religious women in the 30s and 40s. There would be somebody who would be designated to get a driver's license, but they didn't all learn to drive. She made it a point to try to be assigned near where we were, to the degree that she had any say about that. And then, do you remember how she wanted to be with us on vacation and she had to bring 3 other elderly sisters with her just to be
right?
Do you remember that? We have had a childhood like hardly anybody I know, but just so you know, we had a farm in Louisiana. We lived on the Texas-Louisiana border, and Maximus would bring 3 elderly sisters from the mother house in Houston with her just so she could be with us at our farm. And they'd stay for several days, and these women would get up and put on the full habit and be fully dressed and ready to go at, I don't know, crack of dawn. And then we'd have breakfast, and then those sisters would play cards at the table all day long. Do you remember that?
And I remember one of those visits, one of my brothers, who's not you, had just taught my 3 or 4-year-old self a string of swear words that I wanted to show off to them. And that was quite a little episode.
I wish I'd been there for that.
Yeah, they hadn't heard such things come from the mouth of babes or ever. But yeah, I remember a particular brother disappeared into the woods for that day. Didn't show up for a while.
What a sweet little child you were. Well, anyway, I watched how Maximus expressed her love for our dad and our mom and all of us, and largely with presence, however she could do that. And then I watched how Leona created a friendship within her community with Sister Benita. Do you know the story of Benita looking out the window and seeing Leona for the first time?
No, I don't.
All right. Sister Leona was a first grade teacher, and she was on recess duty, playground duty, maybe at lunchtime. And there was a businesswoman, secretary or something, in an office looking out the window down at the playground, and she saw this nun with these children, and she had this like out-of-body experience and thought, I must become that. She wasn't a Catholic.
Wow.
But she told me that. Benita told me that she looked out the window and she saw this nun with these children and said, I need to become that. And so she kind of stopped her life, became a Catholic, inquired about becoming a Dominican, and then once in the order became friends with this person she saw out the window. And
wow.
And
no, I hadn't heard that.
They were just just this graced moment. And the 2 of them did everything they could to be assigned together throughout their careers as elementary school teachers. Late in their life, when they were both 65, they founded their own school. Do you remember Dominican Academy and Montessori school with all these farm animals and all kind of craziness? Do you remember having Did you ever color in all those like laminated things they were creating?
Oh, yes, I helped with a lot of that. It was a lot of fun too.
They were always making flashcards that were very colorful because they were for elementary school little kids. And so
Yeah.
I bring that up because I watched how someone could live a life of love with another member of their community and make it work. So I had two models. One who had a great love for a sibling, family member, one who had a great love for a friend. And that love, it looked to me like moved outward. You know, love has a certain quality to it where it draws us toward another person, and there's a kind of inward quality about love. But then I think when it's really holy, it stays for a moment. It like ricochets, or it multiplies and moves outward. And I watched those two women, our aunts, each have long, loving lives as Dominicans. And I thought maybe I could do that.
I definitely think that they both demonstrated having a servant's heart, as did both our parents as well, because they not only lived their love, but they lived in service of loving others.
Yeah.
And that was a great model, a great lesson to have as a kid, to see people demonstrate that to me.
Well, going back to joy, you're I don't know, a woman of a certain age now. You're 6 years younger than, or 8 years younger than the 66-year-old that I am.
Right.
How have you moved through life creating family? Because we have this Friar thing, this sibling thing. What has loving family been like for you?
I think it's fair to say that I am a relentless optimist. If there's not a good thing happening, if there's not a silver lining, I'll find a can of spray paint and just start decorating around it until there is one. So I've just decided, some of my best friends are people who initially didn't want to like me because I was too this or not enough that. And my habit was just to continue to beam love at them and either get through to them or maybe wear them down around the edges a little bit so that we could at least get along. And I can count several really deeply rewarding friendships that came out of those kinds of situations where we're both here, we're both in the same place, we may as well be kind to one another. And kindness wasn't their first tool out of the box. And I just said, I don't care, I'm just going to be kind to you anyway. And in most cases that worked. So that's how I've set about sort of folding the people around me into my little universe, truly trying to, especially in the work that I do now. I'm on a boat with 14 crew members from 6 different places in the world. We do all sorts of things different, like how someone holds a fork, or just how people move through the day, what their food preferences are, what they listen to, etc. There's all sorts of difference, but we find the common denominator, which is kindness. And everyone can be kind. The smile is the universal language. So I've just tried to gather people around me that warm to that. They might not be that way at first, but maybe they warm to it and then they let me in. And I've had a lot of practice at that, moving about different places, working in different parts of the world, also in yachting. And so far, so good.
Well, I've observed you've brought me into your life, on boats and scuba and all of that. And I've observed in the different places where I've known you in different milieus, different circles of people sort of look to you, I wouldn't say as mother, but as sort of hub. Don't you think, haven't you experienced yourself as being sort of in the center of a network of people? People sort of look to you for some sort of familial kind of leadership in circumstances where people are often far away from their family of origin.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. Sometimes I look around and I see, okay, nobody's doing anything. Well, that must mean Q, do something. And there's usually something in the way of a welcoming or an ice breaking that just needs to happen, or a grace, extending a grace. I know we're leaning towards the conversation around joy, but that where I find my joy is in extending those graces, those kindnesses to people. That's what my joy feels like. That's where it lives, is really helping people feel at ease in their own skins, whatever that might be. And it's usually as simple as a smile and some measure of kindness, whether you're pouring a cup of tea or just setting aside, like making room. And in our living area right now, there's a U-shaped dining area that we can all fit in at one time, but only if we make room for one another. Sometimes there might be someone sitting at the end of the U shape that doesn't want to scooch in, or I think scooch is a Southern word, but it doesn't want to move. And every now and then I'll just come in and hello, and and just bump up alongside them and move them along. And then it's like, oh, okay, they gave ground. It's all good. We have to make accommodations, and then we can all fit, and we can all fit nicely.
Would you say that if you don't feel joyful, starting with acts of kindness is sort of the path?
Absolutely, because I've had a few dark places in my life where, in one instance, a marriage failed after a long, hard, lots of tries, lots of effort. I felt really defeated by that, and leaving it, I didn't have joy. I didn't have an easy smile, but I decided every morning, I don't know where I'm going, but I march at dawn, boots on the ground, smile on my face. And if I fake my smile long enough, it'll be real. And that's exactly what happened in that occasion and in others. And my practice was to get up every morning and go smile at people, because I needed to be smiled at. And you almost can't not smile at a person when they smile at you. My marching in this instance was around a neighborhood in California. At least people's dogs would smile at me to start with. And then as people started to know me in the neighborhood, the people walking the dogs maybe they wouldn't all the way say hello, but at least they would give a nod or a smile. And eventually I found that the smiles that I was faking every morning became genuine. So I'm a big advocate of fake it till you make it. And I think really the only way out of despair is with hope. So I just put on a hopeful attitude and kept marching.
That's where I was going.
And then I marched right into happiness.
You did. And those were years when I think our love for each other was forged more deeply, because we were
absolutely
far from home. And I've moved many times in my priesthood, and it's just not, it looks automatic that, oh, Father so-and-so has been assigned from here to there, and he starts on July 1. Well, but you just left everybody you love. And I don't know, we were there, that was in Stanford when I was at Stanford University.
Mm-hmm.
Moved to Menlo Park as that marriage dissolved. We had some fun times there, just recreating ourselves together. And that was part of the time when we were working on the Toto book and Toto 2. Don't you think that waiting in joyful hope is just part of a life well lived, that you're not going to have joy every moment, that it doesn't mean that you can't hope that you will soon? You call it faking it.
Exactly. I've had to tell myself a little self-coaching from time to time, this isn't forever, it's only now. If I just keep stringing the nows together, I will get to one that's better than this. And even in my prayer lifetime to you anyway. And in most cases that works. So that's how I've set about sort of folding the people around me into my little universe, especially in the work that I do now that I haven't even dreamed of yet. Mm-hmm. And that's joyful hope, that it's striving for, but leaving space for at the same time, that I want this, and this, or something way better that I haven't even imagined. And that's what I think joyful hope is that mm-hmm. I'm joyful now, and maybe I'm only this much joyful. Maybe I'm only a tiny bit joyful. Maybe the only joy I can find is that I'm alive, and that if I'm alive, I get a chance to have better than this. And then waiting for the hope of that, the promise of it. And that's truly optimism, joyful hope.
I'm thinking that some people listening and viewing this are people who are not Catholic, who have gone to a Catholic wedding or a Catholic funeral, somewhere been at a mass where we pray the Our Father together. And mm-hmm. you get toward a part of it where the Catholics stop and the Protestants keep going, deliver us from evil. Yes. For thine is the kingdom. The Protestants are looking, why did everybody stop? And there's this odd little prayer. It has an odd little name. It's called the embolism. It means an expansion. Why would we need to expand the Lord's Prayer? Because the Lord gave it to us. Wouldn't you think that would be the last one we would tamper with?
Right.
Didn't Jesus do a good enough job? But we expand it. But I love the expansion. It's part of what I live by. When the congregation gets to deliver us from evil and go silent, the priest says, "Deliver us, Lord, from every evil." Well, that'd be good. What if the whole world was delivered from evil today? Check.
And grant us
peace in our day. Wouldn't that be great in Ukraine and in broken hearts?
In our hearts, in our minds, in our communities, all of it.
In our politics. Give us peace in our day. In your mercy, keep us free from sin. Sin, to me, that's a church word, but wrongdoing. Aquinas taught of, and Aristotle talked about human acts always going toward a good, but it might be only an apparent and not real good. Sometimes the good thing that we pursue is actually good. Sometimes the thing that looked good and I went toward it, I think I'll rob that bank because I can think of all the good things I would do with that money. That's not a real good. That's an apparent good. But what if we could get rid of all wrongdoing? What if we had clarity of vision so that we only chose good? And what if we were patient and didn't demand that I get everything I want the moment I want it? Deliver us, Lord, from every evil. Grant us peace in our day. In your mercy, keep us free from sin and protect us
from all anxiety.
And I think you and I both have a charism that attracts people that are anxious. Yes. Don't you think that you've attracted people that are anxious because they see a peace in you and they want some of that?
I've had people tell me that quite often, and particularly when we're in situations where anxiety is the norm and I'm more calm than the rest. People are leaning in towards that and saying, "Oh, tell me what you're doing. How can I do that?" So.
I think that has to be received. I don't think you and I just generate that. We don't wake up and say, "I'm going to be calm today," or "I'm going to be peaceful today," or I believe that we first receive love and magnify it and give it, radiate it. But I think you and I share that charism of not being perhaps as anxious as others around us might be, or at least knowing how to talk to anxiety in our self-talk and say, "All right, I hear you, anxious thought."
And our sister Mimi uses the "it could always be worse" skill drill, where she takes whatever the situation is and then puts it in an alligator-filled moat or a pool of vomit or something, and says, "It could always be worse. It could always be worse. It could always be worse." And in that way, she cheers herself right out of the doomy, gloomy situation by imagining it could always be worse, but it's not. But for your audience, we grew up in very Southeast Texas, and hurricane season was a very real deal in our life. We've gone through more hurricanes than any of us can remember anymore. But yeah, so Mimi was on the phone with you in the early blows of Hurricane Ike. And
she was supposed to drop Mom off at the Houston airport, but the TSA people ran away. There was nobody. They were predicting this horrific storm, and people got the message and got out of Dodge, but they didn't go to work. And so people that were trying to get to the airport or get through the airport lines were all clogged up. You were trying to receive Mom up in Oregon to just get her out of the trouble. People don't understand those big storms ruin the electrical grid for weeks. So you can be, even if your house didn't flood or fall down, you're going to be sitting without air conditioning or even a fan for weeks.
Yes.
Without a refrigerator, and maybe the toilet doesn't flush.
And in order to get Mom to the airport and get her through security, Mimi grabbed a wheelchair, sat Mom in it, and spun her through and just said, "Coming through, coming through, coming through." And CNN News caught it. She caught Mimi running through the airport with Mom as though she was the only person there, got her straight to the front of the line of security, out the other side. And then she flew to Oregon and was off the plane, and the news station in Oregon grabbed Mom, and she said, she explained, "Well, my one daughter in Houston said I should leave town, and my other daughter here in Oregon said I should come. So that's what I did."
And do you remember what else she said?
That simple.
Do you remember what else she said?
Tell me.
"I'm so glad I got my hair done."
That's right. That's right. Because
He
she
was
was
on
on two national
CNN and she
television
was on
stations.
local news in Portland. I'm so glad I got
Yes,
to hear that. I was
yes,
watching all
that's
that
exactly right.
in Tucson, all worried about everybody, anxious. Well, I called Mimi because she was supposed to. The plan was they were going to go to their land in West Texas to get away from the hurricane. She was going to drop Mom off at the airport. Billy, her husband, had already driven with another vehicle and he was already out there, and Mimi was supposed to drop Mom at the airport, get on I-10 and drive towards San Antonio. And she never got there. And they were saying, don't go west. The freeways are so clogged, you'll be stuck in traffic. So she went back home, remember?
Right.
And so now she's
Right.
home with one of her sons, Andrew, and sitting in the path of a monster storm. And I called her and said, so have you done all your preparations? And she said, yes, I just came in from out of the yard. Remember that story? I just came in from
Yes,
the yard.
talking to the trees.
And I said, what were you doing in the yard? And she said, well, I got to get the trees ready. Kingwood, where they live, is called the livable forest. And one of the problems when you live in a hurricane zone is trees falling on you. And so she went out and prayed over all the trees and talked to them and explained, and there's a big storm coming. With your roots, stay firmly in the ground. Don't let yourself get uprooted, but above the ground, you don't want to break. You have to sway. So she talked to the trees and told them to grab on tight, but don't be too rigid, sway. And so I ended up preaching on that because it just sounded so wise. I called them the next morning. I woke up like 5 o'clock in the morning to want to know more hurricane coverage. You just want to stare at it all the time when loved ones are in the path of one of those things. And she just ended up saying, I asked Andrew, our nephew, so how did it go? What was it like during the night? And he said, well, there's trees down all over the place. The neighbor's house has a tree right in it. And I said, well, what about yours? No, all of us are just fine.
No trees down here.
Our trees were all, so there wasn't any anxiety on Mimi's part. She said, but I've done all of my preparation. I got the trees all taken care of. So,
there you go.
is there something that hasn't gotten said that you wanted to say on this little enterprise of ours?
Well, one of the things about joy that I think is on the organic level is I think we can breathe it in. Inspiration and conspiration, breathing together, conspiracy, you know, how we both love words, inspiration, inspiring, taking in the holy breath. I just learned not long ago about the neurobiology of breath, that the fear and excitement are the only difference between fear and excitement is the breathing. When we're afraid, we hold our breath. And when we're excited, we have a tendency to breathe more. So when I'm leaning towards anxiety and I'd rather be kneeling towards joy or excitement, I just breathe more. I make myself take big, long, deep breaths and let them out all the way. And my little habit of that is breathe in, breathe out, repeat. Breathe in, breathe out, repeat. Just keep on doing that because I'm going to oxygenate my body and my brain, and it's going to feel less like fear or anxiety and more like joy. And that's why people who get coached in public speaking, when you see on the news, they welcome their guest and the person says, thank you, I'm excited to be here. They're taught to use breathing and use the word excitement to trigger normal breathing if they start to get anxious in an interview. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. Big breath. So I think something as simple as breath work, just a simple breathing, can help us push the needle towards joy. Well,
I have a story about that. You've been with me. You brought me into scuba diving any number of times. And one of the things that I've never found it comfortable, ever. All the times that
but you do it anyway.
But I do it anyway.
You do it anyway because I want you to.
And it's one thing, if people have never scuba dived, it's one thing to walk in from a shoreline where where you can still stand up. But when you go out on a dive boat into deep water and put on weight belts and tanks and stuff like that and make yourself sinkable, and then you jump off, into it. There's just nothing natural about that to me. It always feels like I'm going to die. But you taught me when we're together on a dive boat, we always position ourselves so that we're the last ones in, so that I don't have an audience. And you understand that. Nobody needs to watch Nathan do this. And then when everybody else is already busy and starting their dives, we'll slide in, and you know that I don't want to go under. I want to stay at the surface and bob around, which is the worst thing to do because it's the most agitated. You taught me to
You're in the space between worlds.
Yes, and you taught me to go over to the anchor rope and make my way down bit by bit by bit, and to breathe.
Right.
And I think of that sometimes when I'm upset about something in world events or in my life or whatnot, and I feel like I'm agitated. And I'll think that's what it's like at the surface, but I know that I don't need to live at the surface. Dominicans are semi-contemplative. We were the first to leave the monasteries along with the Franciscans. So we're supposed to have the heart of an ideal monk, some very rounded, peaceful person. But we're out in the world doing stuff. And so whenever I'm agitated, I think about getting off the back of a dive boat, and I think, okay, move through the agitation, but do it quickly. Just breathe and go down and find the quiet spot. And then remember, you used to breathe water in the womb. You know, this is not your first time breathing in a water environment. But that experience has helped me to move through some agitation and think, don't stay where it's agitated, go where it's peaceful.
There you go. Well, that makes me very happy, because it turns out once you get past that 1 minute, you're a really good scuba diver. And, joy to have you underwater.
Yeah, I wish we could find that video of the sharks, because I'd love to see it again. And you and I both have looked for it and couldn't find it, but
I know what hard drive it's on, but it's in storage right now, so we won't get back to it for a while, but some one of these days.
That'll come. All right, we're nearing the end of the hour, so I want to pivot a little bit to the work that we've done together. That's the topic of the Afterlife Interrupted books, and which you mentioned at the beginning, and people can educate themselves about. My website is nathan-castle.com. I never thought I would have a website. All these things just look like impossible, and now I have a podcast. nathan-castle.com. There's links to Amazon, where all three of our books live: the Antoto 2, The Wizard of Oz is a Spiritual Adventure; Afterlife Interrupted, Helping Stuck Souls Cross Over, Helping Souls Cross Over, book 2. In the future on this podcast, I'm hoping that a large component is introducing people to the work that we've done with souls that you could think would have no joy. They died murdered or in a car crash or some awful trauma, but they come, we help them move through a healing process, or we're really kind of just on the tail end of that healing process, helping them move to a next level. I'm hoping that in the future, we're going to do a few things: introduce a story, and they keep coming at the rate of about one a week. I've got some good stories to share with you. I haven't been emailing them to you because I didn't think you'd have the time to read them. You're in like one of the busiest times that I've ever seen you in, and so I haven't loaded your inbox.
Just right now, yeah.
But I have some great stories to share with you that are just from the last month or two. But people bring their story, we help them through, and then for ones that we never tell anybody's story without first getting their permission. And then after we've done that, we make them public, so far in books. I hope that this podcast is going to be another forum to share a news story from time to time. And I'm hoping the podcast tees up book 3, that I can tell some stories on the podcast that become chapters in the 3rd book in that series. But we do that. We tell a story, and then I invite reader feedback through my website. And a lot of what's happened is it's grief support. I didn't write those as grief support books, but a lot of people are brokenhearted because they not only lost a loved one, but they lost them in a tragic, sudden, violent way. And so a second component in this podcast, I hope, will be compassionate response to a story that we tell. What did it stir up? What did it agitate in readers? and what lessons might there be there. And then we're calling that compassionate response. And then the last one is spiritual practice. You outlined one when you talked about breathing in and breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Little tricks, little practices. You and I both are raised Catholic in the Catholic tradition. We go about that in different ways, but we have some similar grounding. So I'm hoping that this podcast will introduce new stories, and then there'll be a kind of compassionate response through reader feedback, and then some spiritual practice that we might be able to suggest to people.
And that's a really good point, because you and I, being raised in our faith tradition, and then also with our respective spiritual gifts, it's very easy for us to not only accept, but also to really fully understand that we survive our deaths. And I think many people in your audience might not have that exposure, that the cultural and religious upbringing, and also the individual experience of it. Although I personally believe that our connection to spirit is in us, in all humans, at a soul level, whether it was cultivated and encouraged, or whether we've been able to tap into it and have had the opportunity to really have awareness of it and nurture it a little bit. But when people who are meeting me and learning about my spiritual gifts hear more about it, they're like, well, there was this one time that the hairs on the back of my neck rose up, or I had a dream and I woke up feeling so close to my loved one, or gee, I had this experience and it felt more than real. It didn't feel like I was imagining it. It felt real in a sense, whether it's through a departed loved one or some kind of other knowing. I think that our spirituality is just one of our senses that, like taste or sight or hearing, I don't think we give it enough credit for what it is. I think it's all too easy to have it shamed out of us, whether it's as a child with our imaginary friend who turns out that's our guardian angel, and some well-meaning adult says, oh, you're too old for imaginary friends, stop listening to that, don't talk to me about that. And so the child stops. I know that I was encouraged, and I know that you were as well, to really tap into that. And I think that's why it's so prevalent for us and so easy for us to tap into. So that your audience experiments with allowing that in.
Yeah, and maybe we can help with that. There were experiences that I had that I did learn that you better not talk about that. People would think you're nuts. So I also have that too. It's not like I was unaffected by that phenomenon. I bring this topic of dealing with people who have died back to what in the Catholic Church is called the Easter Proclamation. It's one sentence: Jesus is risen from the dead. And we're not just happy for him. He's the template, the model, showing us all that death does not define us. And it stops some things, but it's really the end of a chapter, not a book. It's not the end of a story. It's a passage from one thing to a next thing. Well,
Amen.
Thank you for being with me today. And I hope that you'll come and be a frequent guest on future podcasts. But for now,
I'd be very happy to do so.
I would love that. And it's good to see you. It'd be good to see you in person whenever that can happen. So,
well,
audience,
I'll keep you posted.
Thank you. Today, that's our show. You can contact us, or me in particular, through my website, nathan-castle.com. Please don't send me Facebook messengers. I just don't like them. If you want me to respond, email me. That's the way to go. Up in the upper right of the website is the YouTube channel, which has a lot of content about spiritual practices and studies of scripture that I think are accessible to a person who hasn't done that before. So we hope to start a dialogue with you. But for now, we're signing off and hope you have a great day. God bless. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can make a donation by clicking the donate button.